President.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, as we bring to an end this debate about the accession treaty for Sweden and Finland, I've been listening in my office to my colleagues' comments, and I think it's all been very constructive. But I do have a different view, on some points that have been made that I think are wrong. And before this body casts a vote, I think they should understand why. I appreciate Senator Paul's focus on Congress's prerogatives with respect to war powers. Like Senator Paul, I have a deep respect for the critical role that the Constitution assigns to Congress in this area, and I believe our democracy is stronger for it. But I rise to convey that Senator Paul's amendment is unnecessary, unprecedented, and if adopted, will be deeply damaging to NATO and our relationship with NATO allies. That is why the Foreign Relations Committee, in marking up these treaties, overwhelmingly, in a bipartisan vote, voted down a substantively identical amendment offered by Senator Paul. The amendment before us today is not necessary. There is no question that the North Atlantic Treaty and the Finland and Sweden protocols do not and cannot supersede the Constitution. No treaty can. This is a well-established and well-understood point that the Supreme Court has reaffirmed. The amendment, however, would be deeply damaging to our core national security interests. Neither the United States nor any other NATO ally has ever insisted on a reservation, a statement that would limit and call into question our adherence to NATO obligations. But that's exactly what this amendment does. If adopted, it would be shared with all NATO members and would signal to them that we are limiting our obligations to NATO with regard to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. If we go down this road, we can expect that other countries will do so as well, gutting the core commitment that NATO members make to each other. Particularly at this time, with Putin's rampage in Ukraine, his energy war against Europe, and his constant saber-rattling, it would be self-defeating to do anything that casts doubt on our rock-solid commitment to NATO and our NATO allies. So let me reiterate. There is no question that neither the treaties we are voting on today nor any treaty can supersede the Constitution. That position is clear in law and clear in logic. The Constitution is supreme. From there, we have one task before us, providing advice and consent to Finland and Sweden's accession in a manner that strengthens the NATO alliance and strengthens our allies. The amendment before us would do the opposite. And for those reasons, I oppose that amendment and urge all of my colleagues to do so as well. Finally, let me address some of the other critics of Sweden and Finland's accession to the NATO alliance. Each day we fail to act, we send a message of indecision and division. Some Republican critics oppose Sweden and Finland joining NATO because they are worried about the cost to the United States. But that is simply untrue. Sweden and Finland will reduce these costs. Instead, we should be asking, what is the cost of delaying NATO expansion? What is the cost of debating protection for Europe's democracies? What is the cost of denying security to Sweden and Finland? I'll tell you, these 11th-hour concerns standing in the way of this process only serve Putin's interests. Other critics want an amendment undermining Article 5 of the NATO Charter that says an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. But as I said before, this was overwhelmingly rejected by both sides of the aisle in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And then there are still others who say we shouldn't accept Sweden and Finland into NATO because China, not Russia, is our greatest foreign policy threat. Well, let me just say one thing. If you want to make sure you meet the China challenge, the first thing you want to do is defeat Russia in Ukraine. Xi Jinping is looking at what's happening in Ukraine. He's looking at what the West is doing in Ukraine, and he's making calculations as it relates to Taiwan and elsewhere in the world. You want to make sure that you defeat Russia in Ukraine. And let me also say that as someone who has worked on foreign policy for 3 decades and who is intimately aware of the danger and risk that China poses, we have to be able to meet that challenge in multiple dimensions. Sometimes we face more than one threat at the same time. Sometimes our values and commitments compel us to stand up for what we believe in. And this is one of those times. Putin's regime continues to push and probe for weakness. And NATO is the best institution we have to check his push for power across the continent. Over the course of the last 70 years that NATO has existed, it has used an open-door policy when it comes to accepting new member countries. These countries must be functioning democracies. They must treat minorities fairly. They must resolve conflicts peacefully, be able to contribute to the NATO alliance. This criteria describes Sweden and Finland to a T. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes to accept these prosperous democracies into NATO. Vote yes to reduce the costs on the United States and the entire military alliance. Vote yes to embracing the values and modern militaries of Sweden and Finland. Vote yes to having these 2 democracies join us. Vote yes to strengthening the North American Treaty Organization today. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.